Abdel Fattah John Jandali was born in Homs, Syria, March the 15th, 1931. Probably you don't recognize his name. He's just another migrant. His son was Steve Jobs. The economy and migration are profoundly linked. Migrants are not the devastating threat to Europe's economy they are so frequently portrayed as. Refugees and economic migrants are an intrinsic part of a successful economy. They always have been.
I come from Afghanistan.
And why did you come here?
Because there was insecurity, no education in Afghanistan. You know, there is everywhere bomb blasting, thieving, smuggling. Anything is possible in Afghanistan. Everywhere you can, there is bomb blast. So I left Afghanistan for this reason. No education, no security.
I'm a Palestinian refugee coming from Lebanon, running away from the war there and running away from the discrimination by the Lebanese government concerning the Palestinian refugees. They are not giving us any rights.
Who would put their child into a leaky boat other than if the water were safer than land? And when you consider those bombs coming at you in all directions, as a parent, you have a duty and responsibility to try and help. And what does Europe want to do? Keep them out, not keep them safe.
The boat was small and the sea was hard. It's very difficult. When you was with 400 on the boat, maximum you put 100 people. That's very, very dangerous.
It was dangerous because you are working with smugglers, so they are dangerous people. So apart from the road, apart from everything, you are under stress because you are dealing with people, they are smuggling persons, so they are risky already.
People have to risk their lives across dangerous sea routes, battle across land routes, face a whole raft of human rights violations along the way to get to a place from where they might be relocated. However, it's clear that the relocation programme is happening too slowly and not meeting the needs.
Europe's migration strategy, its response to a swell of refugees and economic migrants, has been an unmitigated disaster. That's not the fault of millions of migrants fleeing war and destitution. It's a policy failure. Who owns the blame for the policy failure? It's hard to say. Most MEPs from all political groups lay the blame firmly at the feet of the European Council. The member states, they say, have done too little, too late, and use migrants as electoral leverage at home.
I don't like to name and shame individual member states. It is painful, or at least I really get disappointed when I see that certain heads of state think that they can use populism in order to incite hatred and spread fear among their own people. I would also be disappointed by member states that are not implementing the common European asylum system, which insists, or at least obliges them to effectively and securely manage their external borders, because as a result of that, then Schengen is crumbling before our very eyes.
The member states have been extremely dysfunctional. I think that they didn't speak with one voice. Now that we require more sharing of the burden, that burden still is not being shared.
Why the strategy is failing is because it is based on the false assumption that the right solution to a migration crisis is to focus solely on security, solely on trying to keep people out and push people back, rather than acknowledging that desperate people fleeing war and conflict will of course continue to come.
My disappointment with the political situation within the European Union and the member state level is that problems that you see coming, that you do not tackle up front, and then you're always running late and you're always running after the events. And this is a dangerous situation because it puts the whole project of the European Union in danger.
Are the member states being put in a position by the Commission which is really an impossible ask?
No, I think the Commission is not asking anything impossible. They're only asking for every member state to take on the responsibility to fulfill their humanitarian obligation, also their legal obligation. Unfortunately, member states all seem to be saying that they don't want to fulfill that obligation, and that is why we have the crisis. We don't have a crisis so much because of so many people coming. And yes, it's a lot, and yes, it's a challenge, but if these refugees, which are all now in a couple of countries, would be distributed all over the 28 member states of the EU and with in total 500 million inhabitants, there wouldn't be a crisis.
The Catalan government and many city councils like Barcelona and others have offered to receive hundreds or thousands of refugees, much more than the Spanish quota gives to us.
The European Commission hasn't come up with a structural, workable solution. The Commission forgot that they need to work with the member states. The member states are the ones that have to do the job on the front line, so that's why it's failed. It's basically, they played it like panic football, and they've given a patchwork solution, and that hasn't really worked.
Steve Jobs and that immigrant at Google, Sergey Brin, were always focused on time. They understood if we don't deliver soon, someone else will. In Europe, it is exactly the same. If centrist politicians do not deliver soon, someone else will.
There's different interpretations of what a hotspot should be. From my point of view, it can work well if it's a registration center from which people then will also be distributed all over the European Union. But that doesn't currently work because member states are not ready to accept those refugees coming from there. So the registration has worked or has started to work, so that is going in the right direction. But what I don't want to see is hotspots, just a place where people are going to be camped and where they're left when no other member state is willing to take their responsibility.
The problem is, even today when the Parliament is examining where the hotspots have got to, we have to be honest and understand that we're not measuring up to the vast scale of the problem. So we have hotspots, but we're not really touching or scratching the surface of the problem.
Here again, we see that there's a shortage of staff, of specialisation, that the national administrations are also not playing their role. So in reality, these so-called hotspots have not made a substantial difference on the ground.
This is the world's most famous hotspot, Ellis Island. Every migrant knew where they would arrive. Every migrant was registered, and still today, we can trace their passage and lineage. There were no computers. There was no internet. It was basic, but it worked. America prospered.
America did pretty well out of that influx of people. What lessons can we learn from history?
America also in the past has taken on board a lot of refugees via resettlement, and this is something we can learn from the US, to resettle more people so that they can come in legally. But of course, you also have to allow other ways for people to get in. You have to make sure that you employ a humanitarian visa, for example, which is possible in the European Union, but member states rarely use it.
Right now, a lot of people are dying unnecessarily at sea. If we can work from Turkey or from the refugee camps, that would be the best way. Also, it means that people who are vulnerable, like people with disabilities, children, mothers with children, have more of a chance to come to Europe from the camps. Right now, only people who have money and are fit are able to cross the Mediterranean, and that's not really fair.
Angela Merkel's brave humanitarian open door for refugees is now closing. This week, in what many build as the most important speech of her career, Merkel promised to noticeably reduce Germany's refugee flow. Merkel's bold leadership was poorly and hastily implemented. History, however, will not judge her harshly. She risked her position to do what she saw as the right thing.
We already have a lot of rules in place, but they haven't been implemented. But the Commission at the same time is introducing new legislation, new ideas. We prefer the Commission to work on what we already have in place because it's a good system. It's a common European asylum system. And the Dublin rules, they're very, very clear. Why mess with what we've already have?
We need, in many fields, an European power to have a single policy in Europe in this respect. European institutions have no real power to deal with this. And now we discover that European Commission is only to give recommendations of good practices, but at the end of the day has no binding powers to impose to some member states obligations.
It's clearly a leadership crisis. We have the money, we have the mechanisms. What is direly lacking is the political will to really make a mark. This is a crisis of historical proportion, the worst refugee crisis since World War II, and history will remember it that way.
If Canada's new Prime Minister is to be known for anything, it will be this.
They step off the plane as refugees, but they walk out of this terminal as permanent residents of Canada.
This Europe is leadership. This is implementation.
We define a Canadian not by a skin color or a language or a religion or a background, but by a shared set of values.
The Canadian policy is supported by facts. Migrants benefit the economy. Dealing with radicals as criminals rather than as a clash of civilizations is a prudent defense policy, less inflammatory, more just. It's a self-confident response by a self-confident leader. It's a vision thing.
Why has EU migration strategy failed?
I would not like to think it has failed. If anything, I find myself in a much more optimistic situation than if you had asked me this question 1 year ago, where we were just seeing the new moves by the European Commission, identifying and appointing a commissioner specifically responsible for migration. Has enough been done? Absolutely not. Does a lot still have to be done? Of course. But I think that there is finally an awareness and an acknowledgement that this is not just a challenge for a little or small number of countries.
We need a system of border and coast guard organized on a European level with contributions from the member states. We need to make sure that on this basis we understand what is happening and we respond far more quickly to the challenges we face.
We are not presenting invasive measures, I would say, but supportive and preventive measures. Yes, the agency will be able, in case of pressure at the external borders, to intervene both at the specific request from the member states and also without.
For all the dysfunctional politicking of the European Union, there is still a clear evolution of policy direction. The question is, how fast will Europe go? And if it doesn't go quickly enough, what will the consequences be?
What's the consequence of failure?
I don't even want to think about it. Failure is not an option.
When our children look down the telescope of history, they're going to ask each and every one of you, what did you do about this? How could you watch and be an observer to people drowning in the Mediterranean? How could you watch little children being washed up in a beach like a wave? They should have been playing on a beach, and yet they're dying on our beaches.
Irish statesman and philosopher Edmund Burke wrote, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." We must ask, how little have we done? And how complicit in evil have we become?